The anniversary gala was supposed to be a celebration. 30 years since I first turned a dusty garage into something worth believing in. 30 years of sweat, sacrifice, and stubborn resolve. For weeks, I had imagined standing on that stage, thanking the people who helped along the way, honoring Maria, reminding everyone what we stood for. But when I walked into the ballroom that evening, I knew the script had been rewritten without me. The chandeliers sparkled above round tables covered in fine linen. Waiters in black ties carried trays of champagne. The company's logo flashed on massive screens, while a slick highlight reel played. David shaking hands with governors, Vanessa cutting ribbons at new branches, executives grinning in perfectly lit photo ops. My face was nowhere to be seen. I slipped into the back, my briefcase heavy in my hand. Inside were the documents I'd been compiling for weeks. Proof of my financial lifelines, evidence of forged signatures. Vanessa's corporate spending spree disguised as client hospitality. Every page was a blade. When the program began, David took the stage. The crowd applauded like he was a rock star. He stood tall, polished, radiating confidence. 30 years ago, he began, this company was nothing more than an idea. And look at us now, an international force, a leader in innovation, a beacon of the future. The applause thundered. I waited for him to acknowledge me, even with one line. One nod. But nothing came. Instead, he smiled and said, "And tonight, we celebrate not just our past, but our future. A future free from outdated practices, built by new leadership, ready to take us to the next level." My chest burned. Outdated practices. That was me he was talking about. When the speeches ended, we moved to the boardroom upstairs for the formal shareholder session. It was time for the real battle. The long mahogany table gleamed under recessed lights. Every seat was filled, directors, investors, even a few press representatives disguised as guests. At the head of the table sat David, flanked by Vanessa and her father, Cody Jenkins, his smug grin plastered across his face. The agenda lay neatly in front of each chair. My eyes froze on item number 3. Proposal: restructuring of Board of Directors, removal of Dennis Flores. So this was it. The meeting began smoothly. Financial reports, expansion updates, all delivered with rehearsed polish. But I could feel the anticipation building. Like everyone knew the real show was still to come. Finally, David cleared his throat. As we look to the future, the board must make difficult decisions to ensure stability and growth. One of those decisions concerns leadership. With respect to my father's years of service, we believe the company will benefit from streamlined governance. Therefore, I formally propose his removal from the board of directors. Gasps rippled through the room. All eyes turned to me. I stood slowly, my chair scraping against the hardwood. I placed my briefcase on the table and clicked it open. "Before you vote," I said, my voice steady, "I'd like to share a few things." I pulled out the first stack of papers and began sliding them across the table to each director. 5 years of bank statements, I said. Every month, $2,800 withdrawn from my account to cover the company's mortgage when cash flow ran dry. That's $168,000 in personal funds, on top of the down payment I pulled from my home equity loan. Without it, this building wouldn't even exist. Murmurs filled the room as directors flipped through the documents, eyes widening at highlighted numbers and signatures. I pulled out another stack. Emails from your own executives, thanking me for bailing them out when payroll nearly collapsed. Contracts that would have been lost without my intervention. This company didn't survive because of flashy expansion plans or glossy PR reels. It survived because I refused to let it die. Cody leaned forward, his face red. This is irrelevant. We're discussing governance, not personal charity. I turned to him, calm but sharp. Is that what you call it? Charity? Because I call it sacrifice. Sacrifice you've never made, but one I've been making for 3 decades. I pulled out the final folder. And here, I said, sliding glossy receipts across the table, are records of company funds used for personal luxury. $7,000 handbags, trips to the Hamptons, a kitchen remodel billed as client hospitality. Care to explain that, Vanessa? The room went still. Vanessa's face drained of color, but she quickly forced a brittle smile. Those were approved expenses, standard for executives of my position. Approved by whom? I shot back. You? Or your husband, who was too blinded by ambition to see what was happening right under his nose? Gasps and whispers swelled around the table. David slammed his palm on the wood. Enough! This is nothing but a desperate attempt to smear us because you can't accept change. You're making a fool of yourself, Dad. I straightened my shoulders and looked him in the eye. No, son. For the first time in years, I'm reminding this board who actually built this company, who bled for it, and who's been holding it together while you played empire builder with money that wasn't yours. The tension in the room was electric. Directors glanced at each other, weighing every word. The power dynamic was shifting, and everyone knew it. One of the older board members, a man who'd been with us since the early days, cleared his throat. David, is this true? Did you authorize these expenses? These loans? David faltered, searching for words. Vanessa whispered in his ear, but her confidence was cracking too. I pressed the advantage. You can spin the media. You can whisper to investors. But you cannot hide from numbers. Numbers don't lie. And tonight, those numbers tell the truth. You've been reckless, and you've betrayed the trust of every person sitting in this room. The chairman pro tem finally spoke. Given this new information, I move we postpone the vote on Mr. Flores's removal until a full independent audit is conducted. Hands shot up around the table in agreement. David's face went pale. Vanessa squeezed his arm, but the fury in her eyes betrayed her panic. Cody leaned forward, his voice low and venomous. You think this is over, old man? You've made powerful enemies tonight. I gathered my papers back into the briefcase and looked at him calmly. Enemies don't scare me. Regret does. And believe me, by the time this is over, you'll regret underestimating me. When the meeting adjourned, I walked out of the boardroom into the cool night air. Behind me, the tower glowed with its polished facade, but I knew cracks were spreading beneath the surface. For the first time in months, I felt like I wasn't just surviving. I was fighting, and I was winning. But as I climbed into my truck, my phone buzzed with a new message. Anonymous again. Just 4 words. They're not finished yet. I tightened my grip on the wheel, a grim smile on my face. Good. Neither was I. The morning after the boardroom showdown, the city was already buzzing. I woke up to headlines splashed across every business outlet in Spokane. Flores' legacy in jeopardy. Founder exposes misuse of company funds. Boardroom drama erupts at TMG's 30th anniversary gala. Vanessa Jenkins under fire for corporate spending. The press had sunk their teeth into the story, and for once I wasn't the villain. Talk radio hosts debated whether I was a hero reclaiming his company or a bitter old man finally snapping. Cable news ran segments with analysts dissecting the documents I had dropped on the boardroom table. And the shareholders, God bless them, started calling for answers. By noon, the company's stock had fallen 8%. By the end of the week, it was down 15%. Investors were spooked, not by me, but by David and Vanessa. For years, they had strutted around town like royalty. Now their thrones were crumbling. I watched the fallout unfold like a man standing outside in the rain, finally realizing he wasn't the one getting wet. David's face plastered the news, but the admiration was gone. Now, reporters chased him down hallways, shouting questions about forged signatures and misappropriated funds. His confident smile was gone, replaced with the look of a man who knew the walls were closing in. Vanessa didn't handle it as gracefully. Photos of her storming out of boutiques made their way online. Reporters hounding her about the $7,000 handbag, the client dinners that were really wine tastings with her friends. On social media, people called her the Prada CFO and turned her spending into memes. The Jenkins family name, once synonymous with money and influence, was now whispered with disdain. Cody tried to appear on television to defend his daughter, but his arrogance only made things worse. Every word out of his mouth sounded like entitlement, and the public ate him alive. Meanwhile, inside the company, the audit had begun. Independent investigators combed through every transaction, every contract. Employees who had once bowed to David now whispered in corners, waiting to see which way the wind would blow. One afternoon, I walked past the lobby and noticed something. For the first time in months, people looked me in the eye again. The receptionist smiled nervously and said, "Good morning, Mr. Flores." It was small, but it mattered. Respect was returning, inch by inch. But the Jenkins clan wasn't about to go quietly. The letter arrived on a crisp March morning, a thick envelope stamped with the seal of their high-powered law firm. I sat at my kitchen table, slid it open, and unfolded the papers. Notice of intent to file suit. They were accusing me of defamation, interference with corporate governance, and willful sabotage of shareholder value. In plain English, they wanted to sue me for blowing the whistle on their corruption. I read every word, my pulse steady. I'd expected this. People like Cody and Vanessa didn't know how to admit defeat. They only knew how to double down. But I also knew the truth was on my side. And truth, once dragged into the light, was a weapon sharper than any lawyer's pen. Still, I'd be lying if I said the thought of another legal battle didn't weigh heavy. I had already spent 5 years bleeding money for this family. Now they wanted to bleed me in court. David showed up at my house a few nights later. I opened the door to see him standing there, shoulders slumped, tie crooked, eyes dark with exhaustion. For a moment, he looked like the boy I used to carry on my shoulders, not the man who had betrayed me. "Dad," he said quietly, "can we talk?" I let him in. He sat on the couch, running his hands through his hair, his voice breaking. I didn't know they'd take it this far. Vanessa, her parents, they pushed me, told me it was the only way to grow. I should have stood up for you, for the company, for Mom's memory. I listened in silence, my heart torn between fury and pity. "They're saying the house will go into foreclosure," he whispered. "Investors are pulling out. I don't know how to fix this." I looked at him, my own son, drowning in the consequences of his arrogance. And yet, Some part of me still wanted to reach out, to save him. That was the curse of being a father. "You can't fix it with me," I said finally. "Not this time. I carried you for too long. It's time you learned to stand on your own." He looked up, eyes wet. "Does that mean I've lost you?" I shook my head slowly. "No, David. You didn't lose me. You gave me away. There's a difference." The lawsuit loomed, but instead of fear, I felt something else: clarity. For the first time in years, I wasn't hiding. I wasn't swallowing insults or throwing money at problems just to keep the peace. I was standing in the open, facing the storm head on. And I realized something. Storms can destroy, but they can also cleanse. The Jenkins empire was collapsing. David was finally seeing the truth. And I was free. But freedom always comes at a price. As I poured myself a glass of whiskey and watched the evening news replay the footage of Vanessa dodging questions outside the courthouse, I couldn't help but wonder, what would the price be this time? The lawsuit was coming. The war wasn't over. But I was ready. The lawsuit dragged on for months. Cody Jenkins threw everything he had at me. Armies of lawyers, endless motions, a campaign of whispers designed to paint me as vindictive, unstable, dangerous. Every morning I'd wake to headlines twisting my name. Every evening I'd sign another stack of papers for my attorney. But truth has a way of cutting through noise. The auditors finished their report first. Their findings were damning. Unauthorized loans, falsified approvals, misuse of corporate funds for personal luxuries. Every trail led back to David and Vanessa, and by extension, to the Jenkins family. Then came the media shift. The same outlets that once questioned my sanity now ran exposés on the Jenkins scandal. Photos of Vanessa parading her wealth were plastered alongside spreadsheets showing where the money came from. Cody's smug face became a symbol of arrogance, of old money entitlement. The lawsuit collapsed under its own weight. The Jenkinses quietly withdrew their claims, slinking back into the shadows they once ruled. And just like that, the war was over. But victory didn't feel like champagne and confetti. When the dust settled, the company was battered. Stocks had plummeted, reputations shattered. David was forced to resign as CEO under shareholder pressure. Vanessa disappeared from public view, retreating into the cocoon of her family's estate. Cody's influence, once unshakable in Spokane, crumbled almost overnight. And me? I had a choice. I could fight to reclaim the throne, step back into the boardroom and rebuild what I had created. A part of me, maybe the younger man who built this empire, wanted that. But the older man, the man staring at Maria's photo on the mantel, knew better. I was tired of boardrooms, tired of contracts and egos and battles that consumed years of my life. I didn't want to die clutching a briefcase. So I did the unthinkable. I sold my remaining shares, not in anger, not in defeat, out of liberation. For the first time in 3 decades, I wasn't tied to TMG Corporation. I wasn't defined by its profits or chained to its crises. I was free. I used the money to set up something Maria would have been proud of, a scholarship fund for first-generation college students. Kids like me once was, with more grit than opportunity. Every year, dozens of them would walk through doors I once had to break down with my bare hands. That, I realized, was legacy. Not buildings, not logos, not stock tickers, but lives changed. David came to see me one evening in April. He looked smaller somehow, like the weight of failure had stripped him of his polish. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes tired. "I heard you sold your shares," he said quietly. I nodded. It was time. Silence hung between us for a long moment. Then he said, "Dad, I don't know how to undo what I did. I don't know if I can. But I need you to know. I was proud of you. Even when I didn't act like it. Especially when you stood up to us that night in the boardroom." I studied him. This man who was once my little boy, sketching superheroes on the garage floor. I wanted to be angry forever. But anger is heavy. And I had carried enough. "I forgave you a long time ago, David," I said. "But forgiveness doesn't mean we go back to the way things were. If you want a relationship with me, you'll have to build it from scratch. With honesty. With respect." He nodded, eyes wet. "I'll try. That's all I ask." The seasons turned. Summer came to Spokane, green and alive. My days were suddenly filled with things I had long forgotten. Long walks through Riverfront Park, Sunday dinners with Rosa and her family, afternoons fixing the porch that had flickered for years. I wasn't Chairman Flores anymore. I was just Dennis. And that was enough. One evening I sat on my back porch with a glass of whiskey, watching the sun set behind the mountains. The air smelled of pine and fresh-cut grass. For the first time in decades, I wasn't thinking about quarterly reports or market trends. I was thinking about Maria, about the boy David once was, about the future that still stretched out ahead of me. Legacy, I realized, isn't something you leave in a vault or carve into a skyscraper. It's something you live, every day, in the people you touch and the values you pass on. I raised my glass to the fading light, a quiet toast to the battles fought, the lessons learned, and the freedom finally earned. "Merry Christmas, Maria," I whispered, though it wasn't Christmas. This is the legacy I was meant to leave. Not money wasted, not power hoarded, but dignity and hope. The whiskey burned warm in my chest, the kind of burn that feels like life itself. And for the first time in a long time, the future looked exactly as bright as I was willing to make it.